Hello and welcome to this session from the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. Today our focus is on user experience, or UX, and we will be hearing in a second from three speakers, Charlotte, Clemence and Peng. And Tony, our chair, will introduce our speakers just before they speak. Thanks for joining us. We'll be together for around about an hour and a quarter, perhaps an hour and 20 minutes or so, and it's great to have you along. You'll have found the chat already in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, so please use that to say hello, to put any comments in there, and indeed to put any questions to our speakers. If you do have a question, please try to preface it with Q colon, and then your question. That helps us to pick out questions from chat and other comments. That's really quite helpful. So if you can do that, that will help. That'd be good. And we look forward to dealing with your questions at the end of each presentation. Now, if you do encounter any problems with sound or vision, then please do, as regulars know, please check that your internet signal is good. And please also check your browser. So if you are trying to use either Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer, that may well be the cause of your problems. If you are, then please leave the room, come back using the link that you have in a different browser, and that should work for you. Otherwise, refresh your device. That should kick in your internet connection, and you should be away again. There is a recording being made, so that will be available to everybody after the event today. Okay, if there is a broadcast issue which affects all of us, and it is a busy time just now for the internet, and we do rely on the internet to make these events happen, then I'll try and fix it. Keep your eyes on chat, and I will look to keep you informed as to how we're getting on. Okay, that's about all you need from me, I think. So without further ado, it's a pleasure for me to introduce your chair for today, Tony Russell-Rose.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve, and welcome everybody. Great to be here, and thanks for joining us on what is the second in our series of talks on UX. Some of you may recall we had a very well-attended seminar a few months ago on the intersection between human factors and user experience, raised a lot of interesting questions, a lot of very valuable follow-up. So we're very excited to present the second in the series of talks on UX. One of the challenges actually with putting this series together was actually that we had so many different options to choose from. In deciding what we were going to present with this second seminar, we realized that UX as a profession, a little bit like human factors, is incredibly diverse, and that there are a lot of themes and a lot of different industries and a lot of different professions and a lot of different communities of practice. And that's what we wanted to convey with this particular seminar, and possibly the next one as well, is that although UX is a many-faceted industry and many-faceted discipline, there are some common themes that bind us all together. And that's one of the things that I think is like a theme that goes through the three talks that we're going to see here. Although ostensibly they're all very different, I think you'll find there's some common themes that are going to be interesting and thought-provoking and provide hopefully some interesting discussion at the end. On that note, as I mentioned, this is part of a series. So we are interested in putting another couple of talks together, actually, and we're thinking about doing another one similar to this. We know we've got other industries out there that people are working in, and we could easily put together another event like today, again, showcasing the diversity in UX. So if you'd like to volunteer for that, please do get in touch. Or if you'd like to perhaps suggest topics or themes or communities of practice, again, feel free to reach out to us either in the chat today or reach out to myself or Steve on social media or through the Institute. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We've got three talks. We've got 75 minutes really for today's session. So we've normally divided them up into about 20-25 minute chunks for each. So it'll be about a 15-20 minute talk, and then we'll try and take the Q&A after each talk. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try and pick them up in a little gap between each talk. And maybe there might be a little bit of time at the end for a little bit of meta discussion. So that's it for my intro. I'm very pleased to introduce a colleague of mine who I'm very privileged to work with on the UX program at the Goldsmiths University of London. So my colleague, Clemence de Beek. Over to you, Clemence, and she's going to talk about an introduction to service design.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tony. Hi, everyone. So my name is Clemence de Beek. I have the chance to work with Tony, and then I'm really excited to be invited today. So today I'm going to focus on service design. But before I start, I wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction as to what I do. So I have a lot of kind of hats. I am a mix between an artist. I work a lot with dance as a medium and technology and audience participation. My background is in UX and service design, and I'm also a lecturer and researcher at Goldsmiths University, which is where I work with Tony. So a little bit more about my background, the type of things I do. I work a lot as a service designer. I do a lot of user research. I work as a consultant and do a lot of strategy, and I'm one of those UX unicorns who's able to do kind of strategy work up until UX and UI. And I have been working in many industries. Just kind of an example of my convoluted background, kind of started from the sports industry, developing devices, electronic devices for sport activities, and evolved in IoT, looking at 360 cameras. And then I've worked in the travel industry and moved in the transport industry and public service. I worked a lot for the police, and so on and so on. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because for me, there's been two common themes. One is making sure that I'm adopting a human-centered process, even when looking a bit more at business challenges, but also looking at having a toolkit that I can use on demand to solve the different problems we were facing. So I want to talk a little bit about that process and that toolkit I tend to use today. I'm known for having worked on certain projects, and I'm going to mention three today that have been quite significant in my background. The first one is the digital transformation of the Met Police. So for international crowd, the Met Police is the police force that look after London and the kind of wider region of London, and they tend to set some of the guidelines for national policing in the UK. They started from challenges of having kind of old school way of interacting with members of the public from call centers and paper forms, and they had to reach a limit in their approaches and processes and couldn't deal with demand. So a few years back, I've been leading this project of looking at how we can digitize their services and kind of create the biggest digital police station for Londoners. As a service designer, my role has been to look at what public-facing offering we can create and public-facing digital services we can create, but also looking at the internal processes and what that look like for the staff and what type of organizational changes we need to make. So this is now live, and it's been a very interesting project from a service design point of view. I've also been working on more kind of transport-related challenges, still looking at internal and external challenges for the humans involved in here. This is an example with the MTA, which is the transport system in New York, where they were looking at revolutionizing their data structure and their digital offering as well. And then I've been involved also with kind of more financial services or information-led, and this one is a recent project for the BBC, offering online services for kids and supporting their learning journey. So that's a little bit about my background. As I was saying, I'm also an artist, and I work a lot in the immersive industry. And interestingly, maybe for another talk, there's a lot of parallel in the tools and approaches I use to create those participative experiences in a more artistic context, but I'll leave that for another day, possibly. So for today, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what is service design. And when we're looking at kind of very well-known services, if I take the example of Airbnb, what we'll be looking at as a service designer is obviously what is the public-facing and customer-facing services we're offering, but also looking at how what needs to be in place for this service to be delivered and provided. So if we take the example of Airbnb, we're also going to be looking at all the different actors that are involved in this service, and what does a homeowner or host need to have in place as service and tools to be able to provide that service as well. Similarly, we'll be looking at overall services from brick and mortar stores and type of interactions with other touch points that might be digital, and how all of those services are coming together in having an interaction between an institution and the final service and the customer. Giving you another example, which is also a bit UK-based, if you ever heard of GP at Hand, this is a service provided by Babylon, but by kind of the NHS in the background, that provides online consultations. The interesting part when we look at service design is not just what is available for the patients, but also what would be available for the doctors and the nurses who would be in the background. What type of information do they need to have access to, and what type of processes do we need to put in place? So giving a little bit more kind of theory around service design, I usually like to explain it and explain the differences between UX and service design using this metaphor of the stage, not just because I'm a dancer, but because I think this is an interesting metaphor, looking at the front stage and the backstage. The front stage tend to be the kind of usual touch points and the services and the products that the end customers will be using to interact with the service, but also looking at what needs to happen in the backstage and how crucial this is to actually consider this as part of the service delivery. So as a service designer, you would be looking at what's happening on the front stage, what's necessary in the backstage, and looking a little bit more at another chart, less metaphorical this time. What you will have at the top would be all the parts that will be creating that user experience, things that are happening in store, digital offering, the staff itself, what communication channels are being used. And this is very commonly what user experience designers will be looking at, specifically designing each of those touch points and looking at how they work together. But from a service design point of view, we're also going to be looking at what's happening on the business side and what the staff is all experiencing. So what type of product do they need to be using to provide the customer-facing experience? What type of tools are you looking at? What type of processes? How the company culture will also be impacting the experience they have, how the customer experiencing the final service, the structure, the policies, and how this is impacting the final experience. So this is kind of roughly how we're looking at what service design is. With words that look at service design is a human-centered design approach that places equal value between that customer experience, the front stage, and the business process, which is the backstage. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to provide high-quality customer experiences and that seamless service delivery. This is not miles off what a UX designer is, it's just where the focus is being put. And a good service design will be human-centered. Even when looking at internal processes, we're looking at the humans that are working on those processes more than the actual, kind of financial side of it, which is important, but really having this angle on the human that is involved in the process. It is extremely co-creative. So in that process, involving all the stakeholders and all the decision makers, and also the staff and the end user, is going to be holistic and also very, very visual practice, because a lot of what we do as service designers is to simplify complexity. So when we're looking at a business as a whole, there is a lot of complexity there, and we're going to use visual design tools to be able to communicate that complexity and then able to solve those complex problems. So from a process point of view, I usually like to use the metaphor of the double diamond that you might be very familiar with, but there are really two clear moments when looking at a service design project. There's the problem space, so making sure we're actually solving the right problem, and making sure that we have enough research in place to make informed decision about the problems we're solving. And there's the solution space, where we're going to be testing and iterating on potential solutions. this is where, we have those kind of different phases. We're going to have that discovery phase where we are opening our perspectives, which is the opening of the diamond, then closing into defining and deciding what the problem is. Then we'll be designing solution and then iterating on this and then delivering that service. So I'm going to dive in a little bit on what are those methods per each steps here. In the delivery discovery phase, what I was explaining is that this is where we're trying to understand the problem. And when it comes to service design, that problem might be coming from different places, and might not know or might not have the right assumptions starting the project. So we will be looking at hunting for insights from all those perspectives, looking at what the customers' needs and motivations, as usual in a normal UX process, are, but also looking at the internal perspective. So what is the experience from a staff perspective? What it is, what type of processes are in place? What type of business models are in place, and how that might be contributing to the problem. So in terms of methods, we will be looking at doing some service safari, which is pretty much doing some a mix between ethnography and contextual inquiries, but it's really this idea of hunting for insights, which is why you have this metaphor of the safari. Traditional interviews, but looking at customers, but also stakeholders and staff, and having those different perspectives, looking at maybe doing some diary studies or more traditional kind of data analysis. So I want to show you a couple of examples of what that looked like. This is an example of the MTA, which is one of the projects I was mentioning, where we've been doing some kind of shadowing with them, and we've been following users of the system in their journey. So we've been starting from where they are at home, and then kind of looking at all the different steps they're going to be taking from starting from home to using the public transport and then arriving at that final destination, and then documenting that process. And then we'll be doing a parallel, looking at it from the staff perspective, and then looking at, shadowing them throughout their entire day. Other examples of methods we can use is also to then kind of using an approach that's called kind of a day in a life, where you would maybe either be a customer in that situation or decide to be a staff member and experience it firsthand. Another method that is being used very commonly in service design in doing research is to use boundary object. So in the context of contextual inquiries or in-depth interviews, being able to build artifacts that help people to remember or interact with certain situations. So the example here was to research the experience in hospitals in a shared bedroom at a hospital, and getting patients really verbalizing their experience and remembering kind of what type of emotions and challenges they were going through. So using kind of small models and artifacts to get people to go back into that emotional states and get more insight from those situations. I'm going to pass on this. You can then build those artifacts in many forms. It can be exploring situations on kind of small cards, or building timelines and so on, or building models about specific kind of in-person interactions. In the second phase, in the defining phase, this is a key moment where this is where we're trying to frame the problem. So earlier I was talking about how we use visualizations a lot in service design to be able to explain complexity and then to simplify complexity. This is really key in that moment where we're trying to frame the problem and make a decision as how to move forward and which problem to solve. So we will be using a series of visualizations like process map or experience map or journey map, service blueprints and so on, and other problem analysis like a root cause analysis or decision matrix to make decisions about the problem to solve. So what's really key here is to allow stakeholders to understand from a human-centered perspective what is the problem that some customers or staff are facing. So this is an example of a journey map here, where what I tend to teach to my students, it is more important to try to visualize where is the problem in that journey. So really using kind of a lot of visual design techniques to highlight those problems. So then when you start engaging with stakeholders and decision makers to simplify the problem for them, so they can start focusing their attention on more kind of human-centered issues. A service blueprint can be also used. So what a service blueprint does is to also map out what's happening backstage in regard to that customer experience. So we'll be looking at visualizing in the process map attached to that customer journey what's happening internally at that moment in the journey. Other tools we might be using, so stakeholder maps to visualize all the actors involved, and all the type of visualization you might be thinking of to help those stakeholders making those key decisions. In that second diamond now, moving on to the design phase, this is where now we know which problem we should be solving. We'll be looking at exploring solutions for that problem. So we'll be moving on now to more an ideation phase and a sketching phase, which is very traditional techniques and workshop techniques. But what's interesting with service design is how do you actually prototype and how do you actually test those service ideas that might be very, very difficult to make tangible for participants. So how do you prototype a process? How do you prototype an exchange of information? So there are a lot of different techniques that I'm going to just brush over for today. I highly recommend looking into this book by Alberto Savoia. That's called The Right It. Historically, that was called Pretotype It, and that was a PDF that people were passing around. It's turned now into an actual book that's called The Right It. And he's explaining this concept of prototyping, which is how much can you fake it before even investing in an actual prototype. And there are some very, very interesting techniques which are in the book more used to test businesses that are completely applicable to service design. So how can you use principles like Mechanical Turk or Wizard of Oz to fake a digital infrastructure or a technology to then small what is the user experience and what is the interaction between the staff member and a customer. Other ways of prototyping, Lego series play might be a really interesting way to prototype when you're trying to visualize very complex organizations. You can start creating models and more kind of physical storyboarding between different parts of the organization and engage participants around those different scenarios. Also, kind of body storming, which is called here, where you are faking the technology with different people within the team. And you can also have participants engaged in that research. This is another example of body storming, where people are embodying different part of the service, up to having someone being the lobby room, someone being the clipboard, someone being the computer, and then understanding how they're playing a role in that whole service delivery. Other ways of prototyping might also be able to kind of fake a spatial infrastructure, or especially when it comes to testing processes. So this is an example from the founder where they were trying to reinvent a layout in the kitchen, but to optimize the process in that kitchen, and just having outlines on the floor to understand where people need to be and how that interaction happens within the kitchen, and then looking at how technology can then support that process as well. And this is another example of actually faking the space, either by kind of building with cardboard what maybe like a front counter might look like in a branch, or here in the hospital, having already people being able to move around a certain scenario with a physical space. And then lastly, this last part is about delivery, and it's about creating actionable outcomes. And then one of the risks when it comes to service design is just have a series of recommendations. So I tend to like really encourage my team or my students to go into actionable outcomes, and then the outcome, well, depends on the problem you were trying to solve. So that could lead to delivering a roadmap if you're looking at something very high level, or that could lead to actually delivering one of the touch points, which is, you know, one of the part of the service you were trying to fix or improve. What is important to understand here is that there will be different kind of lengths when you come to service design project. It might be a very high level project where you're looking more at ecosystem and services and very helicopter view, versus then zooming in a little bit and looking at tasks and journeys, or zooming even more and looking maybe at one specific part of point of interaction. And this is key to understand kind of that zooming in and out, because you won't be able to go to a lot of level of details when you're looking at holistic view. So what's going to be really important is maybe to start looking at more a program approach where you're looking at next step and then road mapping your outcome to then be able to deliver all those different parts of the service. So you might want to start with kind of helicopter view, holistic view. You have an approach and a roadmap, and then break it down to then actually deliver those different parts of the services in more detail. And then what I tend to say is usually with service design, there's no size fit process, but more a big toolbox. And then the big part of being a service designer is actually being able to design that process for each of the problems you're trying to solve. So I hope that kind of gave you a good overview. Lastly, for being a good designer, it's always about designing for the front and the backstage, is being able to zoom in and out, as I was saying, in terms of looking at the scope. It's very, very collaborative and co-creative. A lot of the methods I've showed you actually involving the CEO, the CFO, the staff members, and then customers. And there's a lot of storytelling around bringing that complexity to life and allowing those stakeholders to be able to engage with that complexity. There's a list of tools that I'm just going to leave here for a sec if you want to kind of take a screenshot of those. And then on the next slide, I've got a recommendation for books as well that will give in a second. But yeah, I was trying to follow what's happening in the chat. So while people are looking at some of those recommendations, I'm going to open it to Tony to see if we have any questions here. Okay,
great. Thanks, Clem. Wonderful. Yeah, I thought that was a really insightful talk. I know I've got a lot of questions, but I think I should defer to the what's coming through on the chat. So obviously we have a couple of moments, probably just a couple of minutes for any questions. If you want to put them on the chat, I'll do what I can to read those out for you. I know that we've had one come through already. So I'll share that with you, Clem. The question says, I'm aware of ISO 20000, which is an IT service management standard. Is there any defined pull from this and or other regulations for introducing human factors / UX into a service design / delivery?
That's a tough question.
It is a tough question, yeah.
I would say no, in terms of like having a direct pull or having a direct kind of normative approach to it. But I would say after the first diamond, in that first analysis, a lot of the time, then you start realizing that the problem you're solving is either a UX problem or a human factor problem or a business problem. And then this is where it gets interesting to look at those norms and then those best practices to then apply this in the design phase.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a moment for any other questions. I'll just fire one at you. I think we've got one through on the chat actually. So the question is, how do you account for that? Let me just copy it before it goes off the screen.
Actually, I can read it. I do account for the variation in different users' experience through a service process. For example, some users might have difficulties at a point in the process, but the majority are fine with a particular step. I think I would say this is very similar to doing this for like a more kind of user experience kind of approach to doing the research. It's all about understanding what are the key challenges that people are facing. And then there is a business decision to be made as to do we want to cover and solutionize for all the problems people are encountering, and can we afford it from budget point of view, or do we need to make a decision as to our priority as a business is actually to maybe service certain segments of our user target, or well, let's say like more than one than another. Then from a research methods point of view and the visualizations I've showed you, it is really important to actually account for those differences. So there's a big work around user segmentation and understand what are the different journeys that people might be going through from one segment to another.
Okay, wonderful. We've actually had a couple of other questions come through on the chat, but I'm just conscious of the time, so I think we'll probably have to It's great that we're getting these questions. I do hope we can follow up with them on a subsequent occasion. But I think in the interest of the clock, we probably ought to move on to our next speaker at this point. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Clem, for joining us today. Brilliant talk. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay. So at this point, I'll hand over to our second speaker, who is Peng Lu, who is a doctoral student at Politecnico di Milano. And he's going to be talking about a topic which 5 to 10 years ago, well, 10 years ago, probably didn't exist. So I'm very interested to hear, I'm sure it's a very thriving community of practice now. So I'll hand over to Peng Lu, who will tell us all about topics and trends in automotive UX.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So can you hear me? Okay, I'm Peng Lu, and my topic is about like the preliminary probe into the topics and trends of the automotive user experience research. And currently I'm taking a PhD in design course as a student in Politecnico di Milano. And previously I had background in product service system design and management engineering, also from Polyme. And I have a background bachelor in architecture from China. So before my talking, I have to say that I don't have some kind of a practical experience inside the field of automotive UX design, but I'm working on this topic to define some kind of potential design process for the automotive user experience, and also to define the job profile for automotive user experience designers, and offer them some design tools and methods. And before the sharing, I want to mention the 4 trends in the automotive industry. The first one is like the EV, the electric vehicle. Like we are using more the electricity as a power, and we are abandoning the oil as our power source. And the second one could be very important, the autonomous vehicle, AV. So drivers can be free thanks to like the increasing automation level of cars. And here it is very important to introduce the SAE levels of driving automation, which is proposed by the Society of Automotive Engineers from the United States. Here we can find the 6 levels of automation for cars. And currently we are still, what we can buy from the market are still fall into the level 2, the partial automation. And the third one is connected car, like CV, thanks to the technology of 5G, or even maybe 10 years later, the 6G, and also the IoT technology. Cars can communicate with other cars and also other traffic facilities, and it could build the bridge between the vehicle users and the outside world. And the last one is MaaS, mobility as a service, or shared mobility in short. In this trend, cars are more and more become a kind of service, and the ownership of cars are less important, and it would increase the efficiency of using cars. And what I have done, actually, in this presentation, I want to show some preliminary results of my systematic literature review. I just input these streams in those database I'm using, and I got more than 9,000 of results. But after filtering from 2017 to 2022, I got in total 445 items. And based on this database, you can see that the amount of research in this automotive user experience research are increasing from 2017 to 2020. But maybe because of I just guess that maybe because of the COVID, like there are some limitation for the experiments, and and human contacts, the number just decreased since 2020. And by regions, we can see that China and Germany has the most significant contribution inside this field, but also we can see that the United States, the UK, and South Korea also have some impact in this field. And by the chance, okay, very dominant amount of the papers are focusing on the autonomous vehicle, but for the other three, they're quite less. And I also list another one called intelligent vehicle, because it is kind of undefined term, but a lot of papers are referring this concept. It is a term in between automotive, autonomous vehicle and connected vehicles, something like that. And then, before we talk about the user experience, we need to know what is the user. So inside those 445 items, we can see that most of the research are focusing two type of user. The first one, the user in general. Basically, it includes both the passenger or occupants inside the car and also the driver in the vehicle, or maybe just focusing on the driver. Here we can see also some papers are focusing on the passengers. But here we need to know that some papers are talking about the scenario that in the future the car would be highly or even fully autonomous. So we don't need a driver anymore. So you need to pay attention that in that case those people inside the car should be all of them should be taken as a passenger. And there are also some other users called the external road user. Maybe they are including the pedestrians and some other vehicles. And after all, we can see that the top 20 topics, according to my research, the top one is the human-machine interface, or human-vehicle interface, or human-machine interaction. And second one is the in-vehicle infotainment system, and then the acceptance and trust, and user emotion. But the dominant efforts are focusing on the human-machine interface. So I would focus on the top four because of the time limitation. Okay, for the first one, the human-machine interface, more than 30% of the paper are talking about the human-machine interface principle or process, or maybe like the mechanism. So how people would interact with the car, how this kind of interaction could happen. And then the second one could be the design case, and also the modified human-machine interface as a kind of solution, and also the solution testing. And some others are less significant. And talking about the vehicle parts related to this topic, you can see that the head-up display is much more, how to say that, more mentioned in that field. We can see, and then the cockpit, then the external human machine interface, external HMI, because as I mentioned before, the autonomous vehicle and the connected vehicle, cars can get connected with other road user. So we need to get to interact with them, and the other display, like the touch screen in front of the car. I mean, like a steering wheel. And we can see here, this diagram is showing the trends of those topics and subtopics. The light blue is the percentage of human machine interface, or this main topic in that year. For instance, in 2070, you can see that around 40% of papers are talking about human-machine interface. That is quite significant amount, and then this number is going a little bit lower and lower, maybe because of the COVID. It could get less than 33%. That is the average. And you can see that at the very beginning, 2017, the main subtopic is about the design case, like different design case in terms of the human-machine interface. But then the human-machine interface principle and process, like the mechanism of a human-machine interface, are taking the role. And after that, every year, the main topic is the human-machine interface principle. And then it goes to the in-vehicle infotainment system. You can see that it is more balanced than the HMI one. The biggest part is talking about the infotainment theory, like it's also about the mechanism behind that, behind how people get interact with the infotainment system. And the second part could be the own information. So what kind of information? The second part is the usage case, a case study. And the third one is the own information. It's talk about what kind of information should be conveyed to the user in the car, and also the entertainment. What kind of entertainment they're using, and then the rest are quite balanced. And then talking about the trends, we can see that the trends are quite weird because of the 2020. It just stopped the increasing this kind of increasing tension or condition. Like it stopped increasing till 2020, but we can see that it is more, when we think about the percentage of the research, it is more balanced in between 30% to 20%. And at the very beginning, there are no dominant subtopic, but when time goes to 2018 and after, more and more papers are talking about the infotainment theory, the mechanism of infotainment, and then the infotainment user case study kind of take this kind of dominant status. And we go to the acceptance and trust topic. So this topic is mainly about how people can accept and trust the car, especially for the autonomous vehicle. And also this topic could also offer some kind of concern on some minority group, like the old driver, whether the old driver could accept some new technologies like the autonomous vehicle in the car. And you can see that the most part of those research are focusing on the principle and mechanism. It's like how people could get trust and accept the car. And the second part is like the solution to improve the acceptance and trust of the car. And then the third one is like which part, talking about which part of the acceptance and trust. It's like, okay, maybe they're trusting, whether they are trusting the seat, they're trusting the screen, or they're trusting the ADAS system, the automation system. It is like what. And the rest part is focusing on the evaluation of the acceptance and trust solution. And you can see that it's quite similar with the infotainment part. like till 2020, there are more and more research focusing on this field, on this topic, and before 2019, the number is a little bit decreasing, but after that, there are more and more people working on this field. And as I mentioned before in the previous page, over half of the paper are talking about the acceptance and trust principle and mechanism. So you can see that almost all of them, the dominant subtopic is about this. But in 2019, 2018, you can see the dominant one is the what, the acceptance and trust of what. And the fourth one is the user emotion. It's like, because it's quite important to, firstly, to know the emotion of the driver and also other user, because emotion is quite tricky. If the driver have the very, very good emotion, maybe they would focus, have better attention and focusing on the driving, this kind of activity. But if they are, for instance, like they're angry and they have this kind of a negative emotion, maybe it would influence their driving status, and they would have some kind of extreme behavior on the road. So you can see here the most the biggest part is about the influence on emotion. It's like okay, how the other parts or how the other factors elements inside the car could have some kind of information, have some kind of influence on the emotion, on the user emotion. And the rest of four, they're quite similar, like 7 to 9. They are, first one, the emotion as an output. Okay, the first one is talking about the impact on emotion, but the second one is like, okay, what's the output of the emotion? Okay, what would happen? And then the emotion as an element. So some models, some kind of a human factor models, they're taking emotion as an element in the research, and then the emotions impact. So as I mentioned before, like emotion may have some bad effects. Negative emotion may have some bad impact, but what this kind of impact are? So 7 papers are talking about this topic. And then the emotion evaluation. So we have different kind of technologies to help the researcher and also help the car to recognize what kind of emotion the driver is, like the facial recognition, like the gesture, like the eyes tracking, this kind of technology. And so we can see the trends. It is more stable than the previous 3, and as you can see before, the subtopics inside this main topic, user emotion, are quite balanced. So they are very how to say, they distributed in a very random way. Like in the first 2070, the most topic, the most topic and the biggest topic is like the emotion as an output and the influence on emotion, but it goes to the emotion evaluation and etc. And overall, we can see the trends of the topics. Like the first one is always being the human-machine interface, but you can see that this kind of dominant status is getting a little bit challenged because of other topics are increasing. Like at the very beginning, maybe they are less focusing on this field. So the other 3, like in 2017, the other 3 are quite a similar amount. I mean, comparing the human-machine interface, but till 2021, you can see the amount of different topics are quite similar. And the second one can be the in-vehicle infotainment system or driver emotion, and this too. So after all, I want to have to show some summary sorts. The first one is like the automotive user the automotive user experience research are taking the AV as a dominant background, comparing the other two, and maybe there should be more efforts on the other three when thinking about user experience. Like EV is quite important because for EV it completely changed the structure of the car, and because currently maybe the acceptance reason, people may not accept some quite strange car, but so like the manufacturers are still using the old shape of cars, but we can see that in the future, because the EV, the introducing of the EV, the cost structure may get changed, and more effort on the user experience should be input in this field. And also connectivity, CV, it is quite new because now we have like the CarPlay, quite a basic way to connect your iPhone with your car, but in the future we can connect almost everything with your car inside the car, and also we can have some other connection between cars and infrastructures, like maybe you can connect your cars with your parking lot, something like that. So more efforts should be focusing on this. And MaaS, the shared mobility, is another very interesting topic, because car using becoming a kind of service. So we don't own the car. Like we need to personalize the car service for the customers, and that is also a kind of blue ocean. The second topic is like second point is like the automotive user experience research are dominantly focusing on HMI, but other fields are increasing, what I had mentioned before. And third one is like we can see that the extent research on this field is quite fragmented. Like some research are focusing on the HMI, or focusing on the emotion, focusing on the acceptance, or focusing on the like some other topics like the design tools, something like that. But the research are quite fragmented. They are just piece by piece, but not offering some kind of a holistic perspective on this field. I mean, they do have some kind of research having this kind of a perspective, but they're quite lacking this kind of research. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Peng. Fascinating talk. I certainly learned a lot from that. Yeah, so I know we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and we've got a moment or two, I think, to take a couple of questions. So feel free to add them in the chat now, if that's suitable. And I'll share with you, Peng, one question which we've had. Well, there's a couple, actually. The specific to your talk, what would be interesting is the approach to understand the emotion. What tools, techniques are used for that?
So for the emotion, some techniques are, as I said before, are using kind of like the facial recognition. they are also not just user experience designer or user experience researcher, like human factors scientists, but also some other computer science researchers in the field. Like they are using AI, like machine learning, this kind of technology. We can build a kind of database of different facial expression. Okay, based on that kind of database, we know, okay, in that phase, maybe the user is happy, or maybe another phase, maybe the user is angry. That's what I know. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so just a quick time check. I think we can squeeze in one more question. And just bear in mind that any other questions we do hope we can follow up with offline following today. I'm sure our speakers will be happy to answer any further questions that we didn't cover. One more: is the reason for the high amount of AV research versus other topics simply a product of trying to get from AV level 2 to AV levels 3 to 5?
Okay, let me see. Is the reason for the... Sorry, I need to read the question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit nervous.
It's the third one from the end at the moment.
Okay. Is the reason for the high? Actually, for the AV, I just use the general term AV, but there are some other research from level 2 to level 4, level 5, even the fully automation. But I think because the AV, there are a lot amount of the paper talking about AV is because for AV, we are not just have some, as I mentioned before, we are not just have some UX researcher, but also the computer science. If you know that, like in computer science, this field, the most important publications are not the journals, but the conference proceedings, because this field is updating so fast, and a large amount of the research talking about user experience are relating to the computer science. So I think, and because like the AV automation, if you want to increase in that the level of the AV, you definitely need the input from the computer science part, and so I think that that could be some kind of some target for the computer scientists to focus on, and so other fields like the EV, like the connected vehicle, like the shared mobilities, they are not so relevant to computer science, because the data behind, I mean, the elements behind the data, or you need to know that some other fields, not just the user experience and the human facts. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. I'll have to stop it there. Thank you so much, Peng. That was a really insightful talk. I know we got lots of other questions, but time is catching up on us at the moment. So thank you, Peng. I want to move on to our final speaker. I'm pleased to introduce Charlotte Wu, who is actually an alumnus, a graduate of the program here, the UX program here at Goldsmiths University of London. And she's gone on to do some great things in the UX and healthcare industry, and she's here today. I'm so pleased she's joining us to tell us about the intersection between those two disciplines, embedding UX principles in healthcare. So over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much first to Tony and Steve for inviting me to join this webinar. It's been really interesting so far, and already I see definitely some of those threads that bind us together. So I'll try to touch on that a little bit. So just to start with a little bit of background on me, is today I'll try to integrate insights from various experience I've had along the way in how to embed UX in health system innovations. And I'll try to bring together a couple of key perspectives. The first is as a clinician and also from a health system perspective. So I'll try to draw from experiences practicing on the ground as a primary care physician, and also prior roles trying to lead groups of clinical teams, including a lot of clinicians. So for instance, I was director of primary care at a large practice in Boston, leading about 150 doctors and 100 staff. And I see that today we have a quite global audience, which is very exciting. So again, I've worked in settings from America, where I grew up, to Africa, Asia, and now to London, where I'm now based. So I'll try to give some examples from different places and practice settings. And the second, I'll try to integrate perspectives from UX and also working in digital health and health industry. I'm one of, I think, a very small group of clinicians who decided that doing 11 plus years of training was not enough, but I was interested enough in UX to do further training in this. And I'll try to, again, bring experiences from my current work at Harness Health Global, where I do health innovation consulting, advising, but also I work on clinical product and UX at startups, to leading larger projects, such as how do we deliver primary care virtually for a global telehealth provider. So I'll try to make it practical. So today what I'll do is touch on 10 learnings and then try to make this helpful for those who are already working in healthcare or those who are interested in working in healthcare. So just a bit of background. I think healthcare is interesting, I think everybody in the world really touches it as a user. So basically, I think anyone who's touched the healthcare system anywhere in the world probably knows that there are a lot of problems, but coming up with good solutions is harder. And so that's where UX really comes in. You can think about the way that we're thinking about innovating in healthcare by thinking about this quadruple aim that I have here. Really, how do we do four things? How do we take good care of populations while reducing costs, make sure that the patients have a good experience, but also, as mentioned in the service design talk, you have to think on the back room of how about all the care team? And as we know in the pandemic, resilience, burnout, all of that is also a large factor. So there's these pressing needs for the human-centered approach that UX gives, but also it's been difficult to achieve really successful change because healthcare is very complex. So today I'll talk a little bit both about the opportunities and also the challenges, because a lot of it is, as you see in the iceberg, underneath the water, underneath the surface. So there are specific strategies along the way that I've learned on how to integrate UX and health, everything from how do we do that co-design and co-creation, how do we do that user research, and then how do we do the development of the innovation we want to implement. So I'll go through 10 take-home points, and I'll start with this one. So the first point I'd like you to leave with is that it's really important to engage all the key users and stakeholders, and there'll be multiple levels and areas. So this is something important because UX is about understanding users. And so in healthcare, I think it's really important to understand that the organizations are complex, they're matrixed, and so those who are using the systems are often not the ones who control the resources, who are different than those who make the decisions, the ones who are part of the IT team or procure. And so as you go through, it's really important to do that very robust user and stakeholder analysis, mapping, and also think about who everyone is, what their pain points are, and what their sphere of influence is. So for example, even within for doctors, not all of them are the same. They're the ones who are practicing and most of their time are seeing patients, very different than ones who do research. So I think the first take-home point is that you want to be very robust in your user and stakeholder analysis. The second point I want to highlight is that you need to make time for this complexity. And part of that is reaching out as early as possible. So it's never too early to start connecting to these potential users and stakeholders. It's best even at the stage of defining the problems and brainstorming. And unfortunately, in my experience, often this does not happen, and people will come with solutions and come too late, and that will not have a fit with what people need on the ground. So I think there's a really important to reach into your toolkit on how to do change management. And as Peng had mentioned, acceptance and trust in healthcare, in addition to automotive, is also a large factor, because healthcare is one in which things do not change quickly. Many systems, we're still using pagers. That has been out the door in most other industries. So know that you're coming into a industry that's slow to change. And so it's really important to reach out early and also figure out who are you going to be your champions. That takes us to the third point, which is a cultural note, which is, I think, across all industries, especially in healthcare, that coming from the inside is better than looking in from the outside in. And this is really important and highlights how it's important to come in early, empathize, right? You can use those methods that Clemence mentioned, such as shadowing, understanding the day of life, really helping getting the engagement of your on the ground champions. And I think this is really important. And I also give an example of one project that I was a part of that was thinking about how do we do earlier cancer screening. And in this very, very large clinic and practice, prior innovations had not gone well. Things just didn't stick. And so understanding this and understanding that it's really important to come from the inside and make sure that you have the champions. I had a very, we'll say, a document that was not shared with anybody else except for our team, but really went through every single clinician. In this case, there were 60 of them, 60 consultants or attending doctors, and then another 90 practicing resident or trainee doctors. And each one went through where they were on the resistance change management scale. And for the ones that require extra, I would personally go and introduce my, say, UX person or the project manager to them to break down that barrier, because it was so important to make sure we had those champions. So again, I think it's really important to go in with that learning attitude. And really, it's sort of it sort of gets you both, because you both get to learn about their pain points early and define the right problem, but also you engage them as champions. Moving on to the fourth point. So it's really important to then plan your engagement strategy and entry points. So again, I mentioned a little before, I think this is a great time to reach into your toolkit, because shadowing, understanding those workflows, thinking about pretty much where in your toolkit all of those process mapping, user mapping, journeys, all of that's really important. I think a cultural note in terms of healthcare is that many people have not heard of UX, don't understand what that is. One thing that's really interesting is you might be able to leverage some shared principles in quality improvement, which has made it a little bit more in healthcare, because there are shared tools such as process mapping or looking at sort of risks. So I think that's one way you can try to get a little bit entry. And basically, I think you'll want to make sure that you're developing these on the ground sort of champions and focus groups. And the next point, I'll talk about a little bit, some thoughts about how to get their attention. So basically, this is really important because, as you probably know, those working in healthcare are very, very busy. They're really rushing. There's no time. And so I think it's really important to get their attention and get alignment on priority areas and things that they really care about. So I think, again, your users are going to be very different. What the on the ground doctor and nurse and the patient are thinking about is very different also than the person making the decisions at the practice manager level. I think you can think creatively. So, for instance, say in the UK, they have sort of quality framework or QoF measures that basically measure practices on how are you doing on diabetes management, how are you doing on blood pressure control. Those are drivers of what people are caring about, what they're measured on. Think about knowing what those are. Say in the United States, think about accountable care organizations, metrics, many parts of the world, think about patient experience. So all of these things, I think if you do the homework to understand that, you know what are the incentives that practices and people, sort of the users on the ground are really thinking about. The next point is about time, right? So time is very precious. So question, how do you integrate UX research and co-design when people are just so busy, barely have time to eat lunch? So I think one tip on that is to leverage current meetings. So sometimes they're already staff meetings, sometimes they're quality improvement committees meetings. So you can leverage that time already because it's carved out, and then make sure to be prepared. So just as mentioned in the earlier talk, people don't have a lot of time, so you probably aren't going to get these very long workshop sessions. So it's really helpful to come in and bring in artifacts, have people respond to quickly. So example, did a co-design process on a care plan. So it's help in that case versus, of course you want to do the early discovery, but then quickly you bring in some sort of mock up with just areas where you can then pull together and people then can respond to. And that worked a lot better than when you start with the blank page. People have a hard time figuring out where to go from there. I think the other thing about time that's useful is that there is one lever that you can always press in healthcare, because out of all of the users, there's one that is very, very central, and those are the patients. So I think when things are getting maybe sort of off track, or you're having a hard time engaging people, if you talk about let's come back to the patient, for that, no one can refute that. So I think that's one way to sort of get people back to what are we doing when it feels that people are moving in directions or not quite sure why this is important to spend time on that. And a note on how to engage patients. Again, I think in the same time is precious vein. There are often patient advisory groups, advocacy organizations, people are waiting in waiting rooms. So there are definitely ways that you can, again, think about the flow already and see if you can integrate some research or get some input on co-design during those times. Okay, and moving on, I think I wanted to highlight the importance of integration and interoperability. In healthcare, basically, IT has been a big pain point. So I think this is all over the world, that the slow movement from paper to some sort of electronic patient records has been pretty painful. The usability in UX, I think no one would argue, is pretty poor in pretty much all the systems that are available. So this is what people are working with. We're working with multiple systems for scheduling, and then a different one for looking into where the lab results are. And so already users on the ground are stretched too thin and using very sort of poor usability systems. So I think you really need to think about how you don't ask them to open yet another system, that whatever you're doing, if it's in terms of technology, basically is interoperable with what people are doing, and definitely avoid duplication of work. If you want people to enter it here, then enter it there, you're going to lose people. So I think that's not only in healthcare, but it's a particular pain point in healthcare. Moving on to number 8, wanted to highlight that I think all of you probably can imagine that healthcare is very high stakes. So if you think about that, there are a lot of critical safety issues that are top of mind. There really is not room for error. People in healthcare, we talk about the Swiss cheese model. So just having one little pop-up that says, "Are you sure?" is not enough, because then people basically will miss that and something. And what happens, right? You can basically affect someone's health or life. So I think that you need to have many, many checkpoints to make sure that people are doing the right thing, not missing things in healthcare. So I think that's just something you have to think about when you're designing in healthcare. Again, I think a way that you can think about that is with that same quality improvement methodology. And I think with building in safety checks, thinking about where healthcare tends to be, the general understanding of research is often very old school, randomized controlled trials, very long, onerous research. There is a trend towards moving towards faster, iterative research where you learn very quickly, go through quick cycles, but that's not everywhere. So I think just understanding that culturally, you might also need to tackle people who are, very resistant to change, but also don't know how to do sort of quick iteration changes. So keep that in mind. Going to 9, always need to leverage your user insight and experience. So again, I think that goes to what I mentioned before about making sure that you have those user champions. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is that healthcare has been moving away from just the doctor-patient relationship, that sort of traditional sort of dyad. There's a lot of really exciting work leveraging teams where sometimes it's the medical assistant or the social prescriber or the health navigator that is closest to the patient and that understands the system even better. So I think it's really important to expand the notion of who are the experts and then leverage their insights and experience. And lastly, as always, you want to make your innovation indispensable. So again, I think hopefully some of these points in the earlier steps will help get you there. I always talk about really, I think also when you're trying to embed UX in sort of this health system innovation, which really usually is relating to service design, also sometimes can just be more pure sort of technology or sort of other types of design. It's okay to go slow in the beginning to go fast or be more effective later. So I think that might be some push-pull that you'll have to talk about. But again, because it's complex, you do need to take that time to engage all those users and stakeholders, understand those workflows and pain points, get your clinical champions on the inside. And then again, how to make it indispensable if you understood what the pain points are and show them that it's easier to do this a different way than what they were doing before, then you can move towards hardwiring that change and getting it into sort of best practice guidelines and what they do. So examples of this, for instance, is a normal checkup. When you go to say, see your primary care doctor, maybe they take your blood pressure and your weight and that's it. But now, there's a lot more move towards, okay, can we screen for depression, for cancer? Can we ask these different questions? And again, in the beginning, it feels, wait, what is this? But then with engagement about, how our medical assistants can be really care providers and going through the change management steps, definitely as an example in these clinics, it became part of their work, something they're excited about, if even doing when the doctor forgets. And so it can become, if not indispensable, but even sort of a better process and a more enjoyable thing to keep people in very difficult jobs. Okay, so I won't sort of belabor the points, but just so you see here, my last slide is that hopefully you leave with these 10 points about engaging all those key users and stakeholders. Remember, healthcare is complex, so you have to engage early. It's never too early, and that the collaborators can also be your champions. And you want them to be ambassadors. So you're coming from the inside and have the different thoughts about how you engage them early. You get their attention on things that they care about or are incentivized on. Utilize the time that is already allocated for meeting, can help with your UX research design. And you want to think about the pain points of integration, interoperability. If you're thinking about technology, don't forget that healthcare is high stakes. And leverage your insight of your multidisciplinary team members on the ground so you can make your innovation indispensable. And that's the end of my presentation, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Charlotte. Fascinating talk. I'm pleased to see that there was quite a vigorous set of comments and questions going in the chat. I'm aware that time have caught up on us a little bit, but I'm sure we'll be forgiven for squeezing in just a couple of quick questions, if that's okay with everybody. Feel free to add more in the chat, and I'll pick a couple that I know we've had already. So there's one that I think relates to around point 4 in your talk, Charlotte. It says,
Okay.
what tool or scale did you use to measure the resistance? And that question, I think, came in around point 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. I wish that there were sort of, I mean, there are probably very, we'll say there probably are scales that are evidence-based. I'll say in what we used, it was a much more sort of light judgment call. But I think I'll tell you sort of some things that we considered. So because what we were doing was relating to having people use a new population health IT system, we basically did use, for instance, a sort of measurement on getting a sense for where they were in terms of sort of their technology. So basically how digitally savvy they were, right? Because that would sort of affect how quickly or well they were able to learn the new system. By knowing them, because I worked with these colleagues, basically, I think I knew, and so in some ways, this is something that you need your sort of, we'll say your clinical champions, other ones. If you ask, for instance, a medical director or a practice manager, they can tell you. If you ask, who are your thought leaders? Who are people who are quick to adopt, and you can ask sort of some of your prior new sort of innovations or changes. And I basically use that to say, okay, some people are usually the ones to basically volunteer. Other ones are the ones who are constantly complaining, holding them back, not doing it. So it was, I mean, in this case, it was not sort of a, sort of evidence-based scale, but there are things like that. But we just did it by a little bit on how, and then I think the other thing we were able to do was based on a little bit, some people are very quick at getting their notes in, being more efficient. And again, sort of those people usually were really fast about adopting that new technology. So I think for those people, we knew that needed extra support. Really, we just wanted to give them extra support.
Okay, great. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm just conscious of the time. Maybe we can just squeeze one final real quick question in.
Sure.
It says, I'll pick one. I know there's a few that have come in, but here's one from earlier. It says, many co-creation UX techniques tend to be oriented towards having people in a room physically together. Do you have any tips for how to do this in a virtual or hybrid format?
Okay. Well, that is a very good question. That's probably one that deserves probably a whole topic area or webinar in itself. I mean, I've found that I've had to lean hard on tools other people probably know well, like the Miro or the, any type of sort of visual brainstorming tool. So basically, I feel that, because usually, say in person, that I would be doing sticky notes, right? There would be certain things we'd be looking at, and we'd perhaps be moving around or adding to. So I think have tried to be creative to say, okay, fine, we'll put the artifact here. We'll get on, one of those programs where everyone can act on the same, we'll say, board, have them do different things. We could do voting that way. We've used polls, right? So online polls, word clouds, different types of technology tools to try to make it feel interactive. I know that there are other technology tools that I've been part of, which are neat because you actually get people to have little avatars. They walk around, they're able to have conversations, they're able to mock things. So there are even more sophisticated things such as that. But again, I think it is a struggle, but I think we've all had to become a little bit more creative to say, how do we make it interactive using, I think these online tools.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Thank you, Charlotte. And I think you're quite right. This could be a topic for a whole session in its own right. So thank you very much, Charlotte. And thank you to all our speakers for an excellent set of talks. I think that highlighted some of the diversity that we see in the UX profession, and it doesn't end there. We're hoping to hold another event similar to this. If you have suggestions or you'd like to speak, or you have any comments or questions around today's session, please do reach out to either me or Steve in the chat, which I think will still run for another minute or two, or on social media. So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Steve to close out the show.
There, it's time for our chair and our presenters to draw breath. I'm sure you'll agree that's been an hour and a little bit truly well spent. So thank you to them for putting time into producing the content that we've heard today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. If you have, then next week we have a joint event with the Association of Canadian Ergonomists around the topic of human error, an interesting one, I know, certainly in human factor circles. So think human factors, then check our website and you'll see details of this joint event at the same time next week. That's the 30th of March at 4 p.m. UK in association with the Association of Canadian Ergonomists. So truly hands across the pond event, and we're looking forward to that very much. If you've enjoyed it today, please tell your friends and colleagues. Consider membership with us. Associate membership is really pretty straightforward. And Iris, who you can see here and whose details you see here, will also be pleased, of course, to discuss levels and grades of professional membership that may be appropriate for you at the stage of your career. Okay, as Tony said, we will be leaving the chat running for a little while so that you can say your goodbyes. And thank you for making this event so successful. Don't forget the conference is coming along, EHF 2022. You'll find details of that on the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors website. So we look forward to seeing you getting interested in that and hopefully seeing you there. Okay, again, thanks to Tony, to Clémence, to Charlotte and to Peng for their efforts today. Thank you to you for joining us. And until next time, goodbye.